Guys, it's Eddie and today I am back with another movie review for you all. Now today's movie was requested of me right here on YouTube and it is something that I'd never heard of before, as are with most of my requests, and I'm extremely thankful for them. And this was another requested movie that absolutely shocked and delighted me, and it was Train to Busan, directed by Yeon Sang-ho. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And it stars Gong Yoo, Ma Dong-seok and Jung Yoo Mi. I probably butchered all of those names. I'm so sorry to everyone watching. This film followed a divorced father and businessman played by Gong Yoo, who was taking his daughter to visit her mother in Busan for her birthday. And on the journey, unfortunately, it didn't go as smoothly as they had planned, because there seems to be an outbreak of a virus that is turning people very rapidly into zombies. Now, while this father and his daughter are on the train, they encounter fellow passengers that they sort of team up with along the way to sort of help their own cause of survival. And it's a very adrenaline-filled film, which, you know, actually really captures your emotions actually as well. Now, this film contained a lot of the stereotypical horror cliches, the sort of character that sacrifices himself to save others, the persistent, easily hateful enemy character that throughout the movie is rather selfish for his own sake of survival rather than helping others. You know, a lot of the typical cliches that we associate with horror were in the actual film. But I think that what Yeon Sang-ho did was he combined these sort of typical cliches that we find in every horror film and placed them in this film with innovative elements and, you know, really kind of touching and heartwarming notes, such as the father's relationship with his daughter and the way that sort of is kind of rockily set up. It's not a very strong or loving relationship at first, but obviously with the dire situation they're in, it starts to develop a little bit more, and, you know, it becomes a far more secure attachment as the film develops. And I thought that that was actually very, very smart and very interesting. And it feels like a lot of horror films don't have that depth that this film presented with the characters. For example, the characters were not one-dimensional. They were very, very deeply socially layered. They were funny and irresistibly likable a lot of the time. You were unaware of becoming so attached to them, but by the end of the film you came to realise, you know, just how much you were affected by their characters and how much you liked them. There was also a great array of different kinds of characters that were all sort of quirky and interesting in their own way. For example, the man and his wife, played by Ma Dong-seok and Jung Yoo Mi, and there were the team of baseball players and their cheerleader, the two old women, the sisters. You know, there was loads of different kinds of people that were trapped on that train, and you really got to know each and every one of them, and 99% of the time they were all likable, and you really came to care about them. My personal favourites were the man and his pregnant wife. I thought they were fantastic. You know, he was really, really witty and very funny, and despite providing some light comedic relief within the film, which is something that you definitely needed with all the gore and all of the sadness, he was, you know, a really fantastic and you know, complex character as well as the others. There was something that I liked about the directorial elements of the film, particularly the clever reveals and clues at the beginning as to what was coming. For example, the deer reanimating and coming back to life after being run over at the very, very start. The sort of whizzing past of fire trucks when the protagonist and his daughter are driving around. And all of this happens before the the film kicks into this very fast-paced, immediate and relentless array of, you know, bloody gore and zombie attacks. So I think that those clues that sort of set you up for it, got you geared up and ready, were really interesting and really clever. And then, of course, you know, the film really doesn't stop once it started, and that's something that I quite liked about this film. It didn't really give you that much of a break between, you know, all the sort of zombie attacks. Speaking of which, something that I really liked about this film were the zombies themselves. I thought they were frightfully grotesque. The way they moved, the sort of jerky movements, the way that the zombies were choreographed within the film, I thought were fantastically repulsive. But they were also hilariously dumb at times. So it was fun to watch the protagonist and, you know, the characters that we were following throughout the film outwit them quite a lot. There was sort of this triumphant feeling to that, but their actual twitchy sort of movements and the way they sort of hissed and snarled was really, really disgusting. And I thought that, you know, I really liked that. As a horror fan, it was incredibly appealing, and I thought that, you know, this didn't feel like we were just watching a regular zombie movie. It felt innovative and it felt interesting. And that whole claustrophobic element of being trapped on a train with them and having to move through carts and, you know, shut the doors as quickly as possible to keep them out was absolutely terrifying. I think that premise alone is enough to scare you. I often like films that take place sort of more or less in one room or one place. And, you know, I think that putting these zombies on a train was a genius streak, and it definitely ramped up that feeling of desperation and of really wanting these characters to succeed and get out of this terrifying dilemma. I thought that this film was the perfect blend of gore, horror, and then also humour and emotion. One of the things that I noticed about this film was that it was incredibly emotional, probably when you least expected it, especially towards the very end. Things occur and you don't expect them to happen, and you don't expect that emotional reaction when they do happen, but I certainly felt very, very teary-eyed when certain things happened. And obviously it's a zombie film, so you know not all of the characters that you're set up with are going to necessarily survive. And when they did bite the dust, I was, you know, I felt incredibly sad. I shed a little tear, in fact. And I think it was unusual for a horror film to invoke such a reaction in me. So, or in anyone actually. So I think, you know, it was definitely different in that. I think that's props to the fantastic acting and the really deep and complex characters that you're presented in the film by Sang-ho. So I thought this was definitely a sensitive horror film, but one that keeps you guessing as to what will happen and who will survive until the credits roll. I think it's totally unpredictable. Obviously, bar a few horror cliches, as I mentioned at the beginning, but for most of the film I really did not know what was going to happen. It took me in directions that I did not expect, and I think that's what was so great about this film. I think it's very hard to create a horror film nowadays without falling into the same similar traps that we've seen rehashed over and over again. But I thought this film was incredibly innovative, and I thought that, you know, there's a tendency with horror films to go full out for the gore and the scare factor with, you know, whilst leaving its characters underdeveloped and forgotten about, but this film got the perfect balance. The characters, the social commentary in the film was, you know, really very interesting, but at the same time, horror fans still got their sort of, they still got that satisfying over generous amount of gore and scares, which was great. I thought this film was incredibly well made, and I thought the acting was amazing. You know, there were some really, really raw emotions, especially towards the end of the film, that just absolutely broke your heart. And I thought that, you know, for a horror film that I didn't necessarily think at the beginning that it was going to particularly overwhelm me, I was certainly blown away by it at the end. I think for a zombie film, it's definitely up there as one of the best I've seen. And I think that any budding horror fan should give this film a try. It's really amazing, and it takes you in directions that you absolutely do not expect, and completely grips your emotions, or at least it did with me anyway. But that's my take on Train to Busan. I'd probably give this 4.5 stars out of 5. I did think that the film was a little bit long-winded in the end. I was kind of not necessarily tiring of the film, but I think there reached a point where I was like, okay, you know, when is something different going to happen? Because they were on the train sort of fighting the zombies for a while, but I still thought that it was an undeniably fantastic film with great direction, great acting, and fantastic writing, fantastic characters, which is rare nowadays. So yep, that's my take on Train to Busan. Thanks so much for watching this review. Always remember that you can request movies for me to review by commenting below or messaging me on my Tumblr. Link is always in the description, but that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!